is Avik Roy, and as I mentioned a moment ago, he is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. And we want to get back to the serious conversation. And by the way, he's also an editor with Forbes magazine. And Mr. Roy, you wanted to talk about today Obamacare, and again, as we mentioned earlier on the program, basically what the president is doing illegally.
Well, the president's doing everything he can to keep the boat, plug the leaks on the boat and keep the boat, going through the water. And there will be leaks here and there, and there are going to be things they're going to try to do. And they know that Congress is going to, at least the House of Representatives isn't so keen on helping them out. So they're going to do what they can. And yes, it's true that the legal justifications of what they've been doing is borderline, and that's been true for a long time.
Talking to Avik Roy of the Manhattan Institute. Tell our listeners what the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research is.
The Manhattan Institute is a nonpartisan think tank based in New York City, where I live. And there I work on, do research on healthcare reform, healthcare policy from a free market point of view.
Now, Obamacare, formally in the sense that its formal name is the Affordable, this is where people laugh out loud.
The Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, Affordable Care Act.
Health Care Act.
Affordable Health Care Act. Anyway, you can name any legislation anything you want to today, and it doesn't mean anything. The name doesn't mean anything necessarily, but more commonly known as Obamacare. Talk about, and we discussed this earlier in the program with Congressman Randy Forbes of Virginia, Avik, and that is, I know you're not a lawyer, but you don't have to be to understand this. The president is changing the dates of implementation of Obamacare on his own, and he does not have the constitutional authority to do that because there are statutory dates assigned to when the laws are supposed to be in effect, and the president, the executive branch, must abide by that, or if they want it changed, go back to the Congress and have the dates changed. Have I got that wrong, or is that your view too?
Well, that's what the Constitution says, but that isn't what the president's been doing, and he hasn't been doing that for a long time. So, the most egregious example, really, of all of this was in his first term. Obamacare mandates $716 billion over the next 10 years in cuts to Medicare, and he postponed a big chunk of those cuts until after the election, so as to ensure that seniors wouldn't be more helping that against the president than they already are, and obviously it worked.
Well, is that not the Republicans' job to go to court to get a decision on this kind of thing?
Because everybody, not.
Whose job is it when a president's lawless? Whose job is it to see that he's kept in check?
Certainly, it's Republicans' job to raise the issue for the public. But in terms of an actual lawsuit, in order to sue, you have to have standing to sue. In order to have standing to sue, you have to be a party that's been injured by what's happened. So it's tricky. Basically, if you're a taxpayer who's losing money because of this, you can't really sue. Courts kind of throw those lawsuits out. And, of course, seniors aren't being injured because they're getting more money than they got before. So finding someone who's been injured and therefore it has the legal standing to sue the government, that's been the trick. And the Obama administration has been very clever about picking the fights where it's actually very hard to actually sue them, and certainly to sue them in time to actually have what you want to stop.
Well, then we don't have law and order. Then we don't have a constitutional republic any longer. If the president can be king.
Well, unfortunately,
and there's nothing anybody can do about it.
Well, the courts can play a role, and I think starting with the New Deal and progressing, the New Deal, and then the Great Society in 1965, and then Obamacare and a few other things have steadily expanded the power of the executive branch to do what it wants to do over the powers of Congress, and Congress has arrogated a lot of powers as well. But the point is, the more power government has, the more that power is going to be wielded in arbitrary ways that don't stick to the letter of law. When you have a law, Obamacare, with 2,500 pages of actual statutory text, and then another 20,000 pages plus of regulations that are spawned by the actual bill itself, you're going to create all these little situations where the government isn't going to do what it's supposed to do. The Congressional Research Office did a study and found that over a third of the deadlines that are written explicitly in the law that was passed by Congress, the Obama administration has either ignored or missed.
Do they have to answer for this? Does the media press them on it? Do they have congressional hearings asking them what's going on? Is there anybody doing anything to try?
Yeah, there's some of that. Yeah, so there are congressional hearings, and then there are media. The media does. New York Times had a big article about amidst the deadline yesterday. I also wrote about it for my Forbes column that got widely read. So there are people who are writing about it, but of course, liberals in the media aren't necessarily going to make that the focus of their energies, and it's up to conservatives in the media to do that, and people like me do their best to do that.
You're listening to the program, Today's Issues, on American Family Radio. Jim along with Tim. And our guest is Avik Roy, who is a senior fellow with the Manhattan Institute. Avik, one of the things that you've talked about is the possibility of the GOP shutting down the government in an attempt to defund Obamacare. Defunding that, it doesn't change the law, does it?
No, it doesn't. And that's one of the reasons why it's such a weak strategy. If you defund Obamacare for 1 year, then, I think we should delay Obamacare for 1 year. That's a better approach, because then you don't risk a government shutdown. We all want to see Obamacare go away if we can. We obviously don't have the votes in Congress to make it happen, in the sense that the Democrats control the Senate, the Democrats control the White House. So in order to get something through, you have to get it through both of those bodies as well as the House of Representatives. And that's the problem, is that if you only control one half of the legislative branch, one third of Washington, there's not a whole lot you can do to stop Obamacare, which is the law of the land, unfortunately.
I want to ask you about that, Avik, because I've had this debate and discussion with some colleagues and friends recently about the concept that Ted Cruz, for example, and the Senate, and Marsha Blackburn and others in the House have put forward. It was what you said, Jim, and what Avik is talking about. Was I understand it, what Ted Cruz is saying is that let's pass the continuing resolution to fund the government, the federal government, at the same level it's being funded.
Right.
But just don't include the money that it's going to take to budget for the implementation of Obamacare, so that so we're just excluding Obamacare, not the rest of the federal government. Do you buy that argument?
Well, that is what they're trying to do. Whether it would work or be a complete catastrophe is where the debate is, and I'm in the camp that says it would be a complete catastrophe. And here's why. What would happen is you pass something like that in the House, then the Senate has to pass its own continuing resolution. The Senate, controlled by Democrats, will pass a resolution that funds all the government, not just the portion excluding Obamacare. Mm-hmm. And then it gets sent back to the House for a final vote through the conference. And at that point, it's up to the House to vote on what the Senate has amended and then strip back out the Obamacare. Well, they can't strip it out. They basically have to vote it up or down, because it's already gone through the legislative process. It's in the conference now. So at that point, it's up to the House to say, do we shut down the government or do we pass what the Senate has brought us? And there is no way that that's going to play out in a way that's favorable to Republicans. Republicans would be blamed for shutting down the government, not the Democrats. And what Cruz and Lee are trying to say is, well, it will be Democrats' fault if they shut down the government. No one would believe that, because the fact is it's Republicans who've been agitating for this. It's been Republicans who are trying to do an end run around the normal legislative process and use the fact that they have control only one branch of the legislature to do something unusual. The media will kill us on this, and we will, this is what ended the Gingrich Revolution in the 90s. Everyone complains about how Republicans spent all this money during the Bush years. That was a Republican Congress. So why do they do that? Because the government shutdown scared them and made them advocates of big government. They gave up on the idea of reducing spending. And that's what we'd be subjecting to ourselves to if we did this again.
Talking to Avik Roy, A-V-I-K, is Avik's first name, Roy. He's with the Manhattan Institute. How can people, we've got some more questions for you here, but how can people read what you've written on this?
Well, I have a piece in National Review today. If you just Google, if you go to nationalreview.com, you'll see it. It's called Obamacare's Shutdown Shock Jocks. And if you want to follow my work more generally, you can just Google my name, Avik Roy, and I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on at Forbes, I'm at National Review.
Just so I understand what the point you're making here clearly is, as opposed to what Senator Ted Cruz is recommending. You're saying that you can't do what he is suggesting. In other words, he's saying defund Obamacare, but fund the rest of the federal government. And you're saying that goes, that's the House and the Senate working together, and that when it goes back to the House, let's just say it did pass, Harry Reid and the Democrats are going to say, no, we're going to include the funding for Obamacare. And you're saying when this goes back to the House of Representatives, how would it work now exactly?
Well, remember how legislation works, right? So it originates in the House.
Yes.
Then the Senate takes up the bill,
and they're not going to defund the Senate. Let's say the House votes. Let's say the House votes to defund Obamacare.
Yeah,
it goes to the Senate. Then what happens?
So the Senate then has its bill, which will amend the continuing resolution and come out and say, okay, we're going to fund the whole government, including Obamacare.
Gotcha.
And then they send it back to the House for final approval. And at that point, it will be up to the House to either
all or nothing,
pass what the Senate has passed, or fall apart and shut down the government. And remember, we're shutting down the government. This is an unusual case. It's actually a lot worse than 1995. So 1995, there were most of the government was funded. It was just a few things that were going to be stopped, like national parks and things like that.
Right.
This time around, because of the way all the legislation kind of was packaged together, the entire government will shut down. The military will shut down. The border police will shut down. Everything will shut down, and it's going to be so hard.
You can't do that. You can't do that.
You can't.
No, you can't do that. Well, I want to see one Republican is going to vote for that. So I don't understand where this is going exactly. I appreciate the zeal of Senator Cruz and our friend Congressman Blackburn on wanting to do something to slow this down or to stop it, Obamacare, but.
There are other strategies, and I think that's the key point to mention is that, the shutting down the government strategy is going to totally backfire, and that's why there isn't even support among Republicans for it. But what you could do is try to persuade the public to support a one-year delay in the law.
Well,
because there's so many problems. Go ahead.
I was going to say that was going to be my question, and the question in its entirety, how many Republicans do you think would be receptive to that? And how many Democrats as well would find that receptive? Because as everything so far points to the president just simply wanting to push this back. So with Congress allowing him to do that, what would the receptivity be?
Here's the way I'd put it. I'd say Republicans in general are very much in favor of a one-year delay, and the left wing of the Democratic caucus is opposed to it because they want those subsidies out the door as quickly as possible because they know once those subsidies are out the door, the law will be very difficult to repeal. Mm-hmm. However, there are plenty of red state Democrats who are going to have to be on the fence about this stuff because their constituents are going to say, what? You want this thing to go forward despite the fact that the income eligibility verification doesn't work so people can cheat and lie and steal their way and get the subsidies that they don't deserve? You want to put this thing out there so my medical records and my personal financial records are given to the government, but the government doesn't safeguard them from hackers? There's so many things about the law that just aren't ready for prime time like that. And I think a case can be made to a lot of these red state Democrats, particularly the ones who are up for re-election next year, to say, look, let's support a one-year delay of this law and get everything going, and then we can revisit next year whether it should go forward after that.
What about the idea of going forward with it full steam, let it be a complete, utter disaster, failure, and then the Democrats own it? What about that idea?
There's so many. Do you know of any government programs that have been successful that have been wiped off the book or that have been unsuccessful and wiped